News Radio. I'm your host, Charlie McGrath. It's the 18th day of July, and we got an absolutely fantastic program lined up for you tonight. Joining me here in just a minute is Christina Consolo, also known as the Rad Chick, and she literally, I literally have 9 tabs open of information that she wanted to talk about tonight. None of it is conducive to supporting the nuclear industry. In fact, it's pretty terrifying. So we're going to get into that pretty quick with Christina. Now, coming up in the second hour, I have Deborah Whitman. She's going to enlighten us on what she saw and what she heard coming out of the Bohemian Grove meeting, this uber top secret meeting where these powers that be gather and do who knows what kind of really ritualistic, sick things. But we do know this. They certainly planned the future of this planet out of Bohemian Grove. So she's going to give us an update of that, on that, as well as a summit that's coming up on chemtrails. So going to be a very interesting program. And in the middle, between Christina and Deborah, we're going to get Chris from seedsnow.com. He's going to give us an update on what's going on in the world of food, especially since we've seen, every kind of record you can imagine has been shattered across this country this year and around the world. So there's a lot of people thinking that we're heading for a very, very, very severe, difficult time feeding this planet. And, this isn't only just Chris. I'm just trying to think of the story that I recently read indicating that, the number one crisis facing humanity in the coming years is going to be food and producing enough of it in order to feed the population we have. All right, now, we're going to have some changes coming up to the program, and I alluded to this in my warm-up video, or the promo video I did. I'm having trouble talking tonight, Christina, probably because you're on the air, and you're on the air with me, and Christina, who is a obviously very attractive lady. I'm looking at her image on Skype, and she's in a spacesuit. All right, this is a radiation suit. Okay, she's in a radiation suit with a ray gun, and it's distracting me. I can't even talk, so I'm turning my computer screen. So I don't have
it's a cartoon.
Yeah, that's real life as far as I'm concerned. I'm sitting here looking at it. So anyway, I alluded to the fact in the promo video that there's some changes coming up to the program. Let me touch on them a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to switch from the co-host model to a regularly scheduled guest model. And there's all kinds of reasons for this, but at the end of the day, nothing really changes. We're still going to have Gary every night, or every Monday night for the first hour. We're still going to have Eric as long as his technology is working in the secret undisclosed location. And we're also going to have a phone going off in the background. But these guys are going to be here Tuesday, Thursday, Monday at the regular scheduled time. The big difference is I'm going to be hosting those programs with them. So, and the same thing on Fridays. So this is the change we're going to make, and this will take full effect on Monday. Now, coming up in the next week, we're starting to get some really, really interesting. What are you doing, Malik? What are you doing?
Sorry, turning my phone off.
Did you know you were going to be on the radio tonight?
Yes.
I'm teasing you. All right. So coming up next week, like I said, we're starting to get some callback from some of the folks that weren't calling us back maybe a year ago. Monday night on the second hour, Ellen Brown. For those of you who don't know her, she's a very sought-after interview because she's just an absolutely fabulous writer and columnist. She's going to be on the program Tuesday night in the second hour. Of course, me and Gary will kick it off for the first hour, then Ellen Brown for the second. Tuesday night, it's going to be Eric and myself, and then Mish Shedlock is going to be the guest for the second hour. So we're changing it up a little bit. You're going to be hearing me both hours every night of the week, and I'm still continuing to reach out to bring more and more guests onto the program. I absolutely love our regulars, people like Christina, people like Gary and Eric and Karen, and that's not going to change. But with the 2-hour format, we are going to try to expand out and bring in some new folks as well, some different perspectives. Okay, so let's get into it. Christina Consolo is the Rad Chick. She's a radio host in her own right. She devotes a lot of her time to not only finding out what's going on with radiation around the planet, but I found out she's an avid fisher person, and we probably won't have much time to talk about that. But welcome back from your brief little vacation you had, Christina.
Thank you. It was so nice to get away.
Did you catch any fish?
Yes.
Were they glowing?
Not that I could tell, but I threw them all back.
Probably a good thing, especially reading some of the articles that you sent me today. So let's get into it a little bit. I mean, let's start with what you usually come on here and tell us. Give us an update on what's going on with Fukushima, and hopefully we can, from these stories you sent me, this might take the entire hour. So go ahead and give us an update.
Do you want to start with Japan and work our way across North America? Because there's so much news today.
Well,
I broke it down into, Japan, the West Coast, and then the U.S. overall.
Well, let's get into the U.S. first then, because these are not being reported by the mainstream. Although this is a Reuters story that I'm reading here that you sent me. 4 U.S. power reactors shut down, and during New York City heat wave. There's another one you sent that said there's been an explosion reported at some of these facilities. So let's start here, since most of the audience is listening in the United States, and then we'll get to what's going on in Japan.
Okay, yeah, the 4 plants that were having problems today, 9 Mile Point in New York had a reactor scram. That's when the reactor either is manually shut down because the people running it recognize that there's a problem, or the reactor shuts itself down because some of the numbers are out of whack in terms of the regulation of the process. And what happened is that they had what's called a high neutron flux. Now, a neutron flux in nature is something that we only can visualize if we're like astronomers are watching a star collapse. But this happens inside of nuclear reactors. In fact, it's a way that they measure the stability of the fissioning that's going on in the reactor. And the reactor itself determined that there was an instability in this neutron flux and shut itself down. There isn't any more information available at this point, except the NRC is saying it may have been a faulty sensor. Of course, things are always, downplayed or minimalized.
Right.
And we had a second plant in Limerick, Pennsylvania, that was reported at first to have an explosion, and then scratch that, they changed it to electrical disturbance, which caused a loss of cooling. And these plants have to have adequate cooling for if they do go into shutdown, and then there's backup generators in case those originally fail. It's being declared as an unusual event on the NRC event notification list. Calvert Cliffs in Maryland had a leak in an instrumentation line today. And in Oconee, South Carolina, there's also been a plant shut down, but they haven't stated yet why. And there's nothing on the NRC event notification list yet. And I checked it just before we went on air. But what I saw on the list for today is there's actually 3 other problems going on. 2 of them were at Fort Calhoun. Of course, there's a news blackout on that plant that was declared by Obama last year when the plant flooded. Now they're running tests to see if they can bring that plant back on the line. They found a degradation of an electrical seal that would prevent the plant from operating safely, and a degraded charging line, another electrical problem that contributed to some thermal fatigue. So 2 problems at that plant, and also Quad Cities, Illinois.
Good God.
Had an emergency control room ventilation problem that doesn't allow the workers to be in there because they don't have adequate filtration for the surrounding radioactive environment. So that plant is offline at the moment. So there was actually 7 problems, 2 which are blacked out, 1 that wasn't reported by the mainstream, and then sketchy details really on what's going on at each of these places. But, keep in mind, we did have a long duration X flare that occurred over the weekend where the Earth was bombarded by these charged particles from the sun. And they always warn that this can cause high-frequency radio disturbances, possible power grid failures. And it's just interesting to see that all this week we've been having problems at these nuke plants. When I did the forecast on Monday, we had 5 plants that were having problems. And they were all electrical or computer in nature.
What is causing this? I mean, is this an abnormal amount? Obviously. Rhetorical question.
It's a little bit higher than usual, but I mean, there's usually 1 or 2 reactors a day somewhere in the U.S. that's having a problem because these plants are all so old. You know, they're 30 to 40 years old, and they're wearing out. And the plants don't like to do preventative maintenance because of the cost. They don't like to shut down the reactors because they lose $1 million a day every time a reactor is shut down for maintenance. So usually what they do is they just let it break and then they fix it.
Unbelievable. Well, let's get to the one in New York. That's the one with the well, let me see. You sent me 2 on this one, but the flux issue.
Yes, the high neutron flux.
The flux capacitor.
A scram. What happens during a scram event is that the control rods get inserted into the reactor that stops the fission process.
Christina.
Yes.
Say that again. What happens during
a scram event, which is either manual or the reactor engages the scram, is that the control rods are inserted into a reactor which contain boron to stop the fission process. They absorb the neutrons to stop the reactor from functioning and prevent it from melting down.
So when they performed this procedure, it had a high neutron flux?
The high neutron flux was originally what caused it to scram or shut down.
Oh, okay.
Well, we just don't have any further information. You know, it could be a sensor. The problem is 9 Mile Point is one of those plants that are high on the list of big potential problems in the U.S. because we have 23 reactors in the U.S. that are the same design as the plants in Fukushima, where the spent fuel is on top of the reactors. And not only that, but instead of the control rods coming down from above, they actually get inserted from the bottom. The bottom of the reactor is almost like a spaghetti strainer, and these control rods come up through the bottom. So, you know, that happened to an extent in Fukushima, but then they had, you know, the earthquake, which damaged those reactor vessels. So we don't know if those control rods were ever inserted right. And when the stuff melts down inside, it can run right out the bottom because it has all these holes that the control rods are supposed to come up through. It's a very poor design.
Well, I guess you think you'd want to use gravity to your advantage in this design process, putting these spent fuel rods above it all. So if those aren't cool, they're going to melt down. And then if you have a meltdown, it's just going to leak out through the bottom. And if you lose power, you can't insert the control rod.
Right, and those pools that are on the top of the reactor buildings throughout the United States, they're all full. And some of them are even piggybacking the nuclear fuel because they've run out of space of where to put it because we don't have a long-term storage facility in the United States.
All right, well, for those of us who don't know, me included in that, what is a high neutron flux? Why would that cause this to occur? I mean, what's the big deal with the high neutron flux?
Well, the high neutron flux just shows that there was an instability in the reaction that was going on. The way the neutrons are supposed to be behaving, neutrons are subatomic particles, and the way that they were behaving abnormally, which caused the reactor to shut itself down.
And I guess that's my question. What would cause that? What would cause them to act abnormally?
I have no idea.
Okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm sorry. I just didn't know if it was is it an electrical issue? Is it, a cooling issue?
In the past year of following these reports, this is actually the first time I've ever seen this listed, this type of event occur at any of these plants. And it concerns me not only because 9 Mile Point has this dangerous reactor design that the industry lovingly calls double-decker beach bombs.
Nice.
But, they're of course located near a large population center. This one is in Oswego, New York. And there's a large evacuation zone. And then there's, of course, if you're a downwinder of that area, if there's any trouble in this plant, I mean, we could be, of course, looking at, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people having to evacuate. I mean, it's in a terrible location. The whole East Coast is like that, though. If you look at a map of where all the nuke plants are. They're located near, number one, a lot of fault lines, and number two, huge population centers.
Yeah, I'm reading one of these reports you sent me now on the East Coast, the four that have been shut down. This is hundreds of millions of people. I mean, it's right in the heart of some of the most densely populated real estate, which makes sense. I mean, this is where the energy is being consumed. And somebody in the chat room said, what the heck? All these reactors are just falling apart, and you touched on that. How long has it been since we've had a new reactor? A very long time. But these ones that have been built are, in a lot of cases, 40-plus years old.
Yeah, the U.S. actually has plans to build 30 more, and they have one that they just approved in Georgia recently. And then shortly after that, the head of the NRC resigned, even though his term was going to be up in January. His name is Jasko, and he has been, ever since Fukushima, he has been trying to adhere to the safety standards and going against a lot of the other people in the NRC, and then all of a sudden he resigned. So I don't know what's going on there. We actually talked about this on another show that I was interviewed on Monday. We're hoping that he will turn whistleblower, because a lot of times that's the only way that you find out what's really going on in these industries.
How much ahead of his time did he retire?
His term would be up in January.
Huh. Yeah, well, there's something there. I mean, if he can't even wait it out 6 months, he was obviously, if you're quitting under those circumstances, then obviously you're having a dispute of one kind or another. So I hope he does. I hope he does, because, what kind of event are we away from? I saw this big heat wave come across your region of the country. I mean, is this putting an added strain on these already dilapidated, falling apart, explosions being reported and downgraded to electrical events? Is the weather, the hot weather we're having is this why we're having this increase in problems?
You mean like a strain on the grid? It could be that. It could have something to do with the X flare, and since then we've had two other long duration events. Yesterday we had an M flare, and today we had one too. And these can affect our power grid as well, plus, the age of the reactors. But I wanted to point out, too, this 9 Mile Point plant, this is the third time in a week this plant has had a problem where it's had to shut down. On Monday, they had a problem with the sirens there. They were going off for no reason, and so they were having to check all of the electrical connections and to see if there was a voltage problem. And last week they had a problem with one of their boilers was releasing steam in a place that it shouldn't have been, and they had to put the plant in hot shutdown, which is where they kind of take everything offline. They don't insert the control rods to see if they can fix the problem, and there hasn't been any follow-up to how they corrected that event. It could have been, a faulty seal, but there's actually 10,000 parts in a nuclear reactor. And when you consider the age of these reactors, it's no wonder that they're breaking down as much as they are.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And what blows my mind is the lack of any kind of coverage that this gets. I mean, out of all these articles you sent me tonight, and NN News is primarily covering them. One was on Reuters, and it certainly is not being talked about by the mainstream whatsoever.
No, I mean, just in the last few days, I've seen a bit of an uptick in the mainstream reporting, because they're removing fuel rods now from Reactor 4 in Japan, which is big news. So even the Detroit Free Press covered that today. Well, and I try to encourage people, when you see any articles about Fukushima or about, the safety issues at nuke plants, to go ahead and comment on those articles and direct some of these people that are reading this, if they want more information, go to the alternative news sources to get it, because they're not, people aren't afraid to report the truth, and they're not being paid to cover up the truth like a lot of the mainstream sources are. I mean, just locally, WDIV and WXYZ in my area actually blocked me from posting about nuke plants on their Facebook. But, a lot of their commercial ad areas on their web pages are from DTE Energy, which owns Fermi 2, and, the Palisades plant, and, they're big contributors to the governor of Michigan, to his campaign. They were one of the top 5 contributors, so he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about the safety issues. You know, these plants generate big money.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. And if you look at, you know, companies like General Electric, you know, I mean, they own the media. I mean, they own NBC, MSNBC, CNBC. So of course, and they build these reactors. So of course, there's an obvious agenda to not report the shoddy condition of these literal these weapons of mass destruction if they go sideways.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm your host, Charlie McGrath. Still the 16th day of July, Wednesday. We're joined by Christina Consolo, and I put a bunch of links into the chat room when that break started out, guys. And these are some of the things that Christina sent to me today. I wanted you to be able to, you know, go ahead and click the link and then check it out after the program, because we're certainly in an hour not going to be able to cover all the information that she had sent me today. But I do want to keep it on the U.S. for a minute and then jump over to what's going on with Japan. Because a couple of these stories, first of all, during the break, Christina gave me a link to Fukushima Facts Tumblr, where you can see a bunch of pictures and mutations. But I'm going to drop that into the chat room, but let's wait a minute before we talk about that, because we'll put that in the context of what's going on here in the U.S. So you were talking about the Northwest, Christina, during the break, and I want to find the story here that you, West Coast, the most contaminated by Fukushima cesium. Give us an update on what we're seeing that you think is related directly to Fukushima, because it sounds like a lot of this stuff that's going on the East Coast could or could not, may or may not be related to Fukushima. But when we're talking about the West Coast, and we had the tuna story the last time you were on here, and now even more stories of radiation and exposure on the West Coast.
Yeah, the West Coast data that we have so far, that's where we have the most verifiable data, and there's been some research that's been put out by Stanford and Massachusetts Polytech. The tuna fish we talked about last time, 15 out of 15 were reportedly contaminated, and that came out of Stanford. And also the pollen that was coming from pine trees in Southern California and the San Diego area was showing a marker for Fukushima, where it has cesium-134 and 137. So they know that it came from there. It's now also being found just in the last week. It's being reported in almonds and in dates in California, both showing markers from Fukushima.
134, 137.
Yeah, and beach sand around the San Francisco area that was sent in for analysis was also showing the same type of contamination. And we know that numbers that came out before that were from seaweed and kelp. And also these substances called buckyballs that are formed when a molecule actually forms around, a uranium molecule forms around plutonium. So instead of, if you inhale one of these things and you can't see them, if you inhale one, it's like getting 60 particles at once of, the most deadly substance on Earth. And that's being found in some of the sea spray that's coming off the Pacific Ocean, and that sea spray can travel 300 miles inland.
Wow.
And that's the majority of emails that I get from people reporting sickness are coming from these coastal areas of Washington and Oregon, California, and BC. What are
the reports you're getting on the sickness? I mean, because we know that some of this the results of this exposure is going to be not just now, it's going to be long term. But what are we hearing now for people who are calling you with their symptoms? What are they being affected with?
Breathing problems, hair loss, a lot of sick pets, a lot of bleeding issues, bruises in weird places, or bleeding from the gums. Some people are reporting losing teeth. That's also being reported by people who are living close to the Fukushima plant. Mm-hmm. Some of these things that, we have all this research that was done from Chernobyl. We know that radioactive contamination can cause these symptoms, but it's going to be months and possibly years before we can get all this data analyzed, and all you'd have to do to help mitigate for it is just to live healthier. So it's a no-lose situation to do that. And, hopefully things won't turn out as bad as we think they're going to, but every researcher that I've had on the show or that I've talked to about this has said that even knowing how bad Fukushima is, they're really surprised at how fast things are happening. And a lot of the numbers that we've gotten from TEPCO about what has been released from each reactor is always, infinitesimally larger the next time they report on it. They say, well, we were wrong. It's actually 1,000 times worse than the numbers we released 2 months ago. So we really don't even know what the actual numbers are to base this
Is there
data
anybody
on.
other? Is there you say you're talking to these researchers? Is there anybody in our country with the unbelievable amount of money that our government spends? Is there anybody in an official capacity studying this, or is it all alternative? Or this is vastly more important than probably 95% of the things we spend government money on. Is there anybody that is trying to watch out for the people of this country?
Mm-hmm. There's a few articles that have come out from Stanford. There's been some from UC Berkeley, but UC Berkeley also has ties to the Los Alamos lab where they, do a lot of bomb testing. So we don't know how much to always trust their information. It seems like the people who are doing this independently are the ones that I'm trusting more, because when we get data from some of these universities, they always seem to have a connection to a nuke industry. And they recruit, the nuke industry recruits these kids in these schools because they're very smart. There's not that many that go into nuclear physics, but it's just like the pharmaceutical industry. As an example, when I worked in medicine, every day at lunch, all the pharmaceutical reps come in.
Sure.
And all the residents that are there that are learning, get taken out to lunch, and they get, all this free stuff. And then when they go to meetings, they get, their bar tabs paid and their lunches paid, and they get tickets to ball games and hockey games from these pharmaceutical companies. And then the nuke industry does the same thing to these kids in school. So they have an opportunity to kind of manipulate the information that they're getting. And I know people that actually work in the nuke industry that I grew up with that have told me they tried, and one of them is a physicist that worked on the decommissioning of the Fermi 1 reactor, which melted down in 1966 in just south of Detroit. And this guy had asked for years to get a radiation effect on health class as part of his curriculum for them to pay for it. And they said, you don't need this. You don't need this as part of your job. And he was working with the decommissioning and then with the spent fuel. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't let him learn about what this might do to his health. But pretty much everybody that he's worked with has cancer. But there's so many things that can affect you before you get cancer. And it's basically, just being a sick person or a sick child or being fatigued. Cesium attacks the heart muscle, and it does it quite rapidly. And the effects that we get as adults, are hundreds to even thousands of times worse for children and babies, which is what is the most concerning to me.
All right, let's switch. I just looked at the clock. We have about 10 minutes left with you. So let's switch to, first of all, I do want to mention FukushimaFacts.com. A lot of your work is up there. And as I said, I dropped the link into the Tumblr page there, so you guys can go look at a lot of these mutations that are happening, and touch on that for just a second. I mean, I just during the break looked at some of these pictures. What effects does radiation have in causing mutations in vegetation, or in plant life? And is that an early warning sign of a problem that's going to affect the animal population following?
Sure, and eventually babies, if it's not happening already. We don't have any, data as far as that goes yet. And, I've had a couple of researchers that are working on that and talking with midwives on the East Coast that are reporting some unusual birth defects that are happening. And as soon as we have them on our show, we'll know exactly what's been going on there. But in plant life, this was, there's a few markers that were found around the plant life in Chernobyl and in 3 Mile Island, too. Is that plants, instead of having one stalk, plants that grow with a single stalk will branch or bifurcate multiple times, where instead of having like one flower, you have all of a sudden it splits into like 10 flowers, or the flower head itself will actually grow another flower out of it. And you see this a lot. We saw this with dandelions, enlargement of the stems, or like a doubling, almost where the stem of the dandelion is like a garden hose with multiple heads. And, normal dandelion is one very skinny stem with one flower on top. And we've had pictures of dandelions that look like a head of broccoli.
Wow.
The most, I think, was 26 heads that we have. And there's a video of that on YouTube. I have it on my channel under all my mutation videos. And you have plants that grow very large, very quickly, and the witch's broom effect is where they split or bifurcate multiple times, or they twin, which is instead of having a single flower like in a daisy, they split, so it almost looks like a conjoined flower or conjoined twin.
Right.
And we're seeing that in plants that uptake a lot of water, like weeds, dandelions, daisies, black-eyed Susans, and sunflowers. We're having a lot of people submit pictures of those, and I would imagine if this continues, towards the fall, we're going to see it a lot in produce as well.
I'm looking at some of these pictures right now, and they're exactly what you're talking about, where you have, it looks like conjoined heads of flowers or flowers growing out of flowers. And is this predominant on the West Coast, East Coast, all across the country?
Well, see, most of the images that I get are from BC and Alberta and Canada. I've had a couple submissions from Hawaii, a lot from Washington and Oregon, California, a couple from Utah, and then spotty states here and there. And then for some reason, I have a lot on the East Coast and in the Midwest. There's quite a bit from Michigan, but we also have a lot of rainfall in Michigan because we're surrounded by the Great Lakes. So we have what's called lake effect in the winter, where, Wisconsin may get 4 inches of snow. The west coast of Michigan will get 20 inches of snow, and it's the lake effect from Lake Michigan. And so we could be having more fallout because of that, but it's going to take some analysis of the soil and plant samples that we're sending into people to determine that. I'm saying don't wait for the data, just live healthy now. Do the easy things to avoid exposure, because this is what it looks like is happening. And, some of the numbers that we're getting from the West Coast seems like it's happening a lot faster. It's moving up the food chain very rapidly, a lot faster than any of us thought. And
you said even a lot of the researchers were saying this is a lot faster than they expected.
Right.
All right, well, let's hit, not much time left, let's hit what's going on in Japan, because there's a lot of big news going on there, too. Go ahead.
Well, in Japan, they're starting to remove the fuel rods out of Reactor 4's spent fuel pool, which has been, a very big topic. There were 1,535 spent fuel rods in this pool. They've removed 2 of them in the last 2 days. And there's all kinds of, fanfare going on about that. And they've had some helicopters flying around trying to film it. And TEPCO's saying, we don't want you to film it. It's a very delicate process, and it has to be extracted from the pool and put into another pool. And it has to be done very quickly, because when the fuel rods, they have this cladding, when it gets exposed to air, it ignites. And so it's something that is going to be a very tense process as long as it continues, and it's going to take about 2 years to get all of the fuel out of this pool. And this is the reactor building that looks like it's going to fall over, any second. The side of it's buckling.
And at the exact same time, you have stories coming out, like the Mail online from the UK. Come on in. The water's not radioactive. Families flock to Fukushima Beach after officials declare it safe to swim in the sea 60 months after the disaster. But the disaster isn't over, is it?
No, and that's just 40 miles south of the Fukushima plant, that they opened that beach this weekend, and they had, all kinds of things to entice people to come, and they posted all kinds of pictures of kids playing in the water. And if you've seen, underwater cameras around that plant, there's a lot of dead fish. Pretty much everything's dead from all the boron and stuff that's gone into the ocean after it's been in touch with the fuel inside of those broken reactors, because they're dumping 9 tons of water an hour on each reactor, and they have been doing that for 16 months. And all of that's going into the ocean.
Unbelievable.
And they're opening beaches to let people swim. It's complete insanity. It
is insanity. I'm looking at some of these pictures that you're talking about, and people are there's big media coverage of people getting back into the water. It's sick, is what it is. I mean, it's absolutely sick to think that 40. I mean, we're seeing the levels here. We're seeing mutations across the Pacific Ocean in the United States, and TAPCO has been caught how many times underestimating the amount of release of this radioactive material. And you're right. Every time they come out, the number that they gave the last time has increased by an order of magnitude. I mean, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 times more than they said before. What is the outlook for the facility at Fukushima? I mean, are we going to eventually see a complete and total meltdown?
There's a number of things that could happen if things stay the way they are now, and we can, possibly mitigate our way out of this by, avoiding rainfall and using, like an alert system for when we have fallout that's detected in the jet stream, in the tropopause, or in some of our rainstorms for people to avoid it, or to, shower well when they come inside, like with baking soda, like the military does, to decontaminate, and washing all of our produce well and trying to get it from sources where it's not having fallout rained out all over it all the time like it is in California. Start looking for produce from South America. It's not that hard to find. Really, the safest food is going to be food that's grown indoors, and at least until further notice. And that, is something that we've kind of promoted with our show too, because one of my listeners actually quit his business. He had a great business managing properties, and he started an aquaponics business where he bought a huge warehouse in Oregon, and he's starting to grow fish and seaweed and food inside, where he controls the water, the soil, the air, to make sure that it's not contaminated. And this is going to be the way of the future. And that's just if things stay the way they are now. If anything gets worse at the plant, we might have to do some more drastic things to avoid it.
Or if something happens here, with our dilapidated network of nuclear facilities across the country.
Right. We're also seeing a huge increase in thyroid exposure in families that live 100 kilometers away from the Fukushima plant, are reporting a large number of cysts. One family in particular had 3 young children, and the children had so many cysts on their thyroid that it's actually obstructing blood flow in their neck. This is in an area where the government said it's safe to live, and 36% of the kids that are being tested are showing cysts already developing on their thyroid. And you compare that to Nagasaki, where we dropped an atomic bomb, only 1% of the children in that area had thyroid cysts. Now 36% are showing them in areas 100 kilometers away.
Yeah, this one article is 45% of kids in Fukushima survey had thyroid exposure to radiation.
Yeah.
That's even higher. I just put that.
Yeah, showing the exposure as they're being tested. So, and that wind's blowing over here. And the stuff that goes into the ocean, all our storms get generated out of, and that rains out over here too. I mean, this isn't Japan's problem. This is the entire Northern Hemisphere's problem, and it's going to be pretty much for the rest of our lives and our kids' lives. And we need every smart person in the world working on this to figure out how to, ways to deal with it.
No, we're going to talk about pop culture topics instead and pretend this isn't happening. Pretend it's going to go away. I mean, this is how we deal with crises in this country, in this planet, world. The same thing with the Gulf Coast. The same thing with Fukushima. It's terrifying. But I do appreciate you and your effort. Give us a website to check you out on.
FukushimaFacts.com. I have all my links on there.
FukushimaFacts.com. Christina Consolo, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on, sharing your information with us, even though if it's a bit terrifying. All right, guys, hang tight. We're going to take our long break there on the backside. We're going to have Chris from TeamNow.com come on for a little bit, and then we're going to have Deborah Whitman come on, tell us what she saw at Bohemian Grove. All right, guys, we'll be back in a minute.